We do have several quick emails that we want to work in. Ladies first, Antoinette, coming out of the break, we played another snippet of the interview with Irwin Allen that Guy Williams did prior to Lost in Space. In fact, in the clip we just played, he mentions that he has just finished reading Only You, Dick Daring, which, for the benefit of listeners who are not aware of this book, Only You, Dick Daring is a very funny yet very scathing look at the TV industry, and in particular dealing with the insanity of network executives, that is just as timely today as it was when it was originally published in 1964. One thing I learned from your book, Antoinette, is that one of the reasons why Guy essentially quit acting after the end of Lost in Space was partially because he himself was fed up with the insanity of network executives.
I think so. He said not with networks themselves, but with the way they ran the networks. It's like I said, he had some bad experiences before. They were each different, but you just never know what's going to happen. He even tells about how they didn't even know that the show was canceled. They all thought they were going back to work, and just kind of through word of mouth, they heard that they weren't going back. So he just, I think if something good had come along, he would have taken it, but he decided he would just do lead roles if he wasn't going to do commercials or soap operas or character roles. You know, he was going to just take a lead role, and nothing really good came along.
Well, until they got word about something that was going on in Argentina.
Right. He was also trying to make a movie. A friend of his was going to produce a movie, and he was excited about that, but then they couldn't get the rights to do it. So, like I said, he always still hoping to make a feature film or either create something himself. And then, Zorro followed him around. All of a sudden, in 1973, he got a call from Buenos Aires. They had been running the show, Zorro's show, from 1968, and this was 73, and he went down there and just couldn't believe the reception he got, and he ended up performing down there, working down there, and the Zorro all over again.
Kathy and Antoinette, one thing that Frankie and I talk a lot about, a lot on this program is there are certain actors who get it. There are certain actors who, actors always face typecasting, the risk of typecasting if you're not a successful show, television viewers being the way they are. We tend to think of them in terms of one role or another. And yes, Zorro stayed with them for the balance of his life and career, but, Guy was shrewd enough to sort of accept that and, go with it. And it helped that, people, Argentina was willing to pay him to do that.
That's right. And they Lost in Space was airing, had started airing a year before Zorro. In 1967, Lost in Space was aired down there, but it just didn't go over. He was not called down there for Lost in Space, but when they saw Zorro in '68, they loved him, and he went down there, and the people had buttons, Guy Williams for president. They all called him El Zorro. They didn't even call him his real name. They just actually thought he was the character. But
and I think part of that too was what was happening in Argentina and South America at that time. The people were going through some pretty tough times politically, and that show and the character just struck a tone as being a hero.
Justice, yeah.
Well, it was at the time, too, we harken back to the 70s. It wasn't just in our country, but it was in other countries as well. We had the upheaval of that time of Watergate and Vietnam, but other countries were going through their turmoil, and people need heroes. And the fact that they could look at someone, and again, Guy was smart enough to say, hey, listen, that big break that I wanted, I've had 2 successful shows, I'm not sure lightning's going to strike 3 times, I'm just going to ride this out as long as I can, and luckily he was able to do it. He was living in a beautiful country where they adored and worshipped him. It's not such a bad gig,
No.
I mean, sometimes, we go to autograph shows here. We see them at the hotels where they have the actors, hawking their pictures for $5 or $10, and we understand why they're doing it. And sometimes it's heartbreaking to see certain actors, and we know why they're doing it, and to have to be forced to do that, in order to make ends meet is tough. But I think that he was one of the lucky ones.
Yeah, I have to say this too because there's so many talented actors. But in Hollywood, all the actors know it's 10% talent and 90% luck. It's all timing and luck. So you have a lot of people who are talented who just aren't getting work. But Guy was on TV shows down there, and yeah, he went with it. He met a fencer, and they did these exhibitions. And then I think the real hook was when they told him that after he met this young Olympic fencer, Fernando Lopez, who did the fencing with him, there was talk of a movie down in Argentina. Some producer was saying, we're going to make a movie, Zorro and Son, turn over the sword to the sun. And well, Guy was excited about that, and it gave him a reason to be traveling all throughout the country promoting this film. And unfortunately, the film never happened, and eventually Guy decided to write it himself, but he never could get the funds for it, so there was another disappointment for him. He held on to the script, though, and oddly enough, the Antonio Banderas movie was very similar to what Guy had wanted to do.
Interesting. Of course, you mentioned Zorro and Son, and of course, I don't remember which one of you called me on it, but yes, that was the version we used, because I used it simply because it didn't have the galloping, that you hear on the Disney version, but. One of the things you talk about was obviously Guy was made aware of the short-lived revival in which they sent up the Zorro image in the early 80s, and apparently he was not happy with it.
Oh, and they called him in for an audition? They called him in to do that show, right? Is that what you're talking about, Zorro and Son?
Yes.
Yeah, he came up to be interviewed for it, and he could tell it just was not going to be the class act that Walt Disney had done.
Yeah, it was just too slapstick. He didn't think it was going to go. He just wouldn't do it. And then, as it turned out, I think it was only 5 episodes showed.
And and probably 5 episodes too many. And I say that as much as I like Henry Darrow.
Let me ask you, did they make him audition for that? Did he actually? Now, did they want to meet him, or did they actually expect him to come in and actually read for the part?
He went up from Argentina, but Antoinette, you know more about that.
Yeah, they flew him down to talk to him about it. I guess they were hoping that he would accept the role. They wanted to talk to him about it. And there was another thing he said. He thought Disney was doing it, so he was misled there too. Yeah. He was so trusting, and there was always some disappointment. When he got here, he found out the network was doing it.
Well, that's very unfortunate. But as we say, we can spend another hour talking about the idiocy of network television.
Actually, we could spend about 6 hours.
I would love to mention that Guy was great on Bonanza. Did you all know that he did about 5?
Actually, it's funny that you should mention that.
He played Will Cartwright, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Will Cartwright, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, we have an email from Mark from Sydney, listening to us. God bless him, from Sydney, Australia.
Oh, fantastic.
Mark writes, I grew up watching Lost in Space and was sad to hear the circumstances of Guy's death in 1989, but I loved his work on Bonanza. Also ashamed that he could not have stayed on as a regular.
Amen to that.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And he was really great on that show. See, there was another deception, too. TV Guide had it. TV Guide said Guy Williams will be a regular on Bonanza. And when he got there, he could just feel the hostility in the air, because what he found out later, that Pernell Roberts was threatening to leave the show. So Guy was a pawn. He was used to try to keep Pernell Roberts on the show. And the writers were going kind of crazy. In my book, I have a parallel of the writing, how the storyline was going compared to what was happening in real life. Because Guy was the bait, more or less, and in the series, he ends up riding off in the sunset with the bride, who was supposed to be Pernell Roberts' bride, because they thought he was going to leave, but Robert stayed. And when Robert stayed, and they had such a clique going on there, they couldn't have any new characters, so Guy was dismissed from the show.